My family loved to mock me as the medical school dropout. I kept my mouth shut at my brother's big hospital ceremony, until the chief of surgery noticed me and said, "Professor of Neurosurgery, you made it." The entire room went quiet as my dad's smug smile just shattered. They swore I was a medical school dropout, a failure, an embarrassment to our family's prestigious medical legacy. But what they didn't know was that in a single, heart-stopping moment, their entire world was about to be turned upside down. And I was going to watch it happen. Can you even imagine that kind of betrayal, that kind of judgment, from the people who should know you best? I was standing at the back of my younger brother Ben's residency commencement ceremony, practically invisible. Civilian clothes, just another face in the crowd. The sheer, gut-wrenching irony of it all was almost unbearable. They truly believed I was a medical school washout, but I was, and still am, a professor of neurosurgery, heading a top-secret research division. My work? So cutting-edge, so sensitive, it demanded absolute discretion. As I scanned the sea of proud faces, trying to blend in, I saw him, the dean of the university, looking straight at me. His eyes widened, a flicker of recognition passing over his face that sent a shiver right down my spine. My stomach dropped. Oh no. Growing up in our family, medical excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was an absolute, non-negotiable demand. My father, Dr. Robert Miller, was a renowned cardiovascular surgeon, a legend in his field. Our home wasn't just a house, it was a shrine to medicine, filled with thick medical journals, gleaming awards, and the hushed respect for his life-saving work. Dinner conversations weren't about our day, they were intense rounds of complex case studies and groundbreaking research. His authoritative voice would fill the dining room, his eyes lighting up with pride as Ben, my younger brother, hung on his every word. I listened, equally fascinated, absorbed by it all. But somehow, my enthusiasm never quite landed the same way. "Alex has a brilliant mind," my father would tell his medical colleagues, "but she lacks the focus for clinical practice." That assessment. It stung deep in my core. All I'd ever dreamed of was following in his footsteps. I poured myself into it, spending countless hours in the lab, devouring every anatomy textbook, and ultimately, applied to the top medical schools with a perfect academic record. When I got accepted to Harvard Medical School, it was one of the proudest days of my life. My father actually hugged me. A rare enough occurrence to make that moment monumental. "Don't waste this opportunity," he'd gruffly said, his voice thick with what I desperately hoped was emotion. Medical school was everything I'd envisioned. Challenging. Fulfilling. And I excelled, particularly in neuroanatomy and experimental surgical techniques. What my family never knew, however, was that during my third year, a quiet, elite team from the secretive Blackwell Institute for Advanced Neurological Research approached me. They'd noticed my unique aptitude for complex problem-solving and my innovative approach to neural pathways. They offered me a position in a highly classified program, one that required immediate transition and absolute secrecy. The program demanded a cover story, and they suggested the simplest, most believable one: I dropped out of medical school. It made sense to them, many talented students didn't make it through the grueling demands. It would draw minimal attention. I agreed, believing, naively, that my family would eventually learn the truth when my assignments allowed. Couldn't have been more wrong. "I just don't understand how you could throw it all away," my mother, Martha, said during my first visit home after the supposed dropout. Her disappointment wasn't loud, it manifested in tight lips and averted eyes. "It was so much worse. Your father pulled strings to get you considered." "I didn't ask him to," I replied, my voice barely a whisper, the classified nature of my new position sealing my lips from sharing anything meaningful. My father. He was even worse. He didn't rage. He didn't lecture. He simply stopped talking about me. When relatives asked about his children, he'd light up discussing Ben's accomplishments in his prestigious residency, where he was following the traditional path I'd supposedly abandoned. Then he'd change the subject the moment my name came up. Thanksgiving dinners became exercises in pure endurance. "Ben's been selected for chief resident at Massachusetts General," my father would announce, carving the roast with surgical precision. "Top of his class. We're so proud." My mother would add, her hand resting on Ben's shoulder, her eyes sliding right past me. "It's comforting when your children find their purpose." My cousin Chloe, always tactless, once asked directly across the table, "So, Alex, are you still working that administrative job at the pharmacy?" This was the cover story I maintained, a boring corporate position designed to discourage further questions. "Yes," I answered, swallowing both the lie and my pride. "Still there. Good benefits, I guess." "Good benefits," she replied with a thin smile that conveyed volumes about her assessment of my life choices. The audacity. Meanwhile, my actual career was advancing at an extraordinary pace. I couldn't tell them about the pioneering surgeries in experimental neurological mapping, or the groundbreaking research that had reversed previously incurable conditions. I couldn't mention the complex neural algorithms I developed that had saved countless lives, or the prestigious medical awards accumulating in a secure vault rather than on my wall. I couldn't explain the months of silence when I was unreachable because I was operating deep in a sterile lab or consulting on a global medical crisis. Each success in my classified world seemed to parallel a disappointment in my family's eyes. When I was made head of a research division, my parents were discussing Ben's upcoming fellowship. When I received a secret breakthrough prize in medicine, my mother was lamenting to her friends about her daughter who just didn't apply herself. Ben himself wasn't unkind. He simply followed our parents' lead, growing increasingly distant as our supposed life paths diverged. Occasionally, he'd call with news of his accomplishments, always ending with an awkward, "So, how's the pharmacy job?" I'd murmur, "Congratulations," and offer vague updates about my fictional corporate life, hating every second of the deception. Years passed this way, with the divide growing wider. I developed a thick skin about my family's perception, focusing instead on my missions and the tangible difference I was making. But deep down, the pain of being the family disappointment never fully subsided. Every achievement in my secret life was shadowed by the knowledge that the people who should be proudest didn't even know. My transition from Harvard medical student to the Blackwell Institute was abrupt, intense. While my family believed I was licking my wounds and settling for civilian mediocrity, I was actually undergoing some of the most rigorous training the medical world offers. The program that recruited me specialized in cutting-edge neurosurgical techniques and advanced neurological analysis, a rare combination that suited my particular skills. The research facility was an unmarked compound in Virginia, where days began at 4 a.m. and often ended after midnight. Physical conditioning was merely the foundation. The real work involved learning to process and analyze complex neurological data in real-time crisis situations, often while experiencing extreme physical stress or sleep deprivation during marathon surgeries. "Miller, your mind works differently," my mentor, Dr. Lena Hansen, noted after I solved a particularly complex neural pathway simulation. "You see patterns where others see chaos." This aptitude accelerated my progress. While most trainees required 18 months, I finished in 11. My first assignment came immediately, a high-stakes neurological intervention in Eastern Europe where a new, aggressive neurodegenerative disease was creating alarming ripple effects. Professor David Chin became my mentor during this period, a pioneering figure in reconstructive neurosurgery. She recognized something in me that reminded her of herself. "The traditional medical system isn't built for us," she told me frankly during a debriefing. "But that's precisely why we succeed in it. We approach problems from angles others don't consider." Under her guidance, I learned to navigate not just the operational challenges, but also the unique difficulties of being a woman in this elite space. She taught me to use others' underestimation as an advantage, to speak with quiet authority rather than volume, and to build networks of trust that transcended the usual medical hierarchies. By my 4th year, I had been promoted twice and led my own neurosurgical research team in projects spanning 3 continents. My specialty became extracting critical neurological data and performing advanced procedures in environments where traditional medical resources couldn't operate. One particular mission in Syria resulted in a new surgical technique that prevented widespread neurological damage in victims of chemical attacks. The classified commendation cited my exceptional judgment under extreme pressure and innovative surgical approach. Yet, each time I received recognition within my classified world, the contrast with my family life became more painful. I attended award ceremonies alone, watching other doctors embrace their proud families. I celebrated promotions with colleagues who knew only pieces of my story, never the full picture. And I continued to maintain my cover as an unremarkable corporate drone during increasingly infrequent family visits. "Congratulations on your promotion to assistant manager at the pharmacy," my mother said during one phone call, clearly making an effort to show interest in what she believed was my career. I had just been promoted to associate professor after a successful, life-saving neurosurgical procedure on a world leader. "Thanks, Mom," I replied, hating the deception. "It's just a small step up." The operational security requirements of my position meant maintaining absolute secrecy. Even as I rose to command larger research teams and more sensitive projects, my cover story remained in place. Only a handful of high-ranking medical leaders knew my complete professional record. Most who worked with me knew only the portions relevant to our joint operations. By the time I reached the rank of professor of neurosurgery at age 34, an accomplishment that placed me among the youngest to achieve this distinction, I had led research and operations in over a dozen countries and saved countless lives through pioneering neurosurgical interventions. My specialty in counterneurotism, addressing weaponized neurological agents, had expanded to include disrupting human trafficking networks for organ harvesting and preventing hostile cyber operations against critical medical infrastructure. What made my rapid rise even more remarkable was achieving it while facing the additional challenges women in highly specialized medical fields encounter. I navigated skepticism from some traditional medical circles, adapted to equipment and surgical approaches designed for male physiology, and developed leadership styles that commanded respect in environments where female leaders were still relatively rare. Through it all, I carried the strange burden of my family's disappointment. Each time I returned from a classified deployment to attend a holiday gathering or family event, I stepped back into the role of Alex the underachiever. I became adept at deflecting questions about my work with vague corporate jargon and redirecting conversations to Ben's increasingly impressive medical career. The weight of these dual identities grew heavier with each passing year. There were moments when the deception felt unbearable, like when my father made a passing comment about people who couldn't cut it in real medicine, or when distant relatives asked patronizing questions about when I might find direction in my life. But my commitment to patient care and the groundbreaking research I led always silenced the impulse to reveal the truth. The work was too important, the stakes too high. If maintaining my family's disappointment was the price for operational security, I would continue to pay it, regardless of the personal cost. Last Thanksgiving marked a particular low point in my relationship with my family. I had just returned from coordinating a joint international medical operation with NATO forces, 36 sleepless hours of tension that ultimately prevented a significant biological weapon outbreak. Instead of recovery time, I went straight to my parents' house, exchanging sterile scrubs for civilian clothes and the hypervigilance of command for the different tension of a family dinner. My father stood at the head of the table, crystal glass raised in a toast. "To Ben," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of a chief surgeon that never quite left him, whose selection for the elite cardiac fellowship continues our family's tradition of excellence in medicine. Everyone raised their glasses. My mother beamed with pride, her eyes glistening. "We couldn't be prouder," she added. I joined the toast sincerely. Ben's accomplishment was significant, and despite our strained relationship, I respected his dedication. But as glasses clinked and congratulations flowed, my mother leaned toward her sister and whispered, just loudly enough for me to hear, "At least one of our children is making us proud." The comment sliced through me despite years of developing thick skin. I excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to help with dessert, but really to compose myself. My cousin Chloe followed, cornering me by the refrigerator. "So, still pushing pills at that pharmacy?" she asked, sipping her wine with an air of superiority. Chloe had recently been promoted at her law firm and never missed an opportunity to highlight the contrast in our careers. "Something like that," I replied, focusing on arranging pie slices rather than meeting her gaze. "You know, my firm has an opening in our administrative department," she offered with faux generosity. "Probably pays better than what you're making." I could put in a word. I thanked her politely, while imagining how she might react if she knew I just briefed the World Health Organization the previous week. The dinner conversation shifted to a recent medical breakthrough that had made national news, a complex neurological case I had actually helped coordinate from the research side. I sat silently as my father and uncle analyzed what little information had been released to the public, both confidently incorrect about how the diagnosis had been reached. If they'd considered the apparent protein markers earlier, my father declared with authority, they could have avoided that initial misdiagnosis. I took a long sip of water, knowing the protein markers had been deliberately withheld due to classified research I'd personally verified about an experimental treatment. The urge to correct him burned in my throat, but I swallowed it with my water. After dinner, Ben announced his engagement to his girlfriend, Amelia, a resident he'd met during his rotation. The family erupted in celebration. Champagne appeared, toasts multiplied, and my mother immediately began discussing wedding plans. In the midst of this joyful chaos, my secure phone vibrated with the pattern that indicated highest priority. I slipped away to the guest bedroom to check the message. Immediate travel orders. A situation had developed that required my specific neurological expertise. With a flight scheduled in 3 hours, I returned to the celebration, pulling Ben aside to offer genuine congratulations and explain that a work emergency required me to leave immediately. His face fell in disappointment, tinged with familiar judgment. "Seriously, Alex, it's my engagement celebration. What kind of pharmacy emergency happens on Thanksgiving night?" "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it completely, but unable to explain further. "I wouldn't leave if it wasn't absolutely necessary." My parents reacted with the resigned disappointment I'd grown accustomed to. "Of course, Alex has to leave," my mother said to the relatives, not bothering to lower her voice. Her priorities have always been different. I caught my father's head shake as I gathered my coat, the subtle gesture of disapproval that had followed me since childhood. As I drove away, the family continued celebrating without me, while I prepared mentally for the classified operation ahead. The mission kept me deployed through Christmas and into the new year. When I finally returned, I learned that my absence had become a focal point of family discussion. Ben's engagement party had been held without me, and my failure to attend had been interpreted as further evidence of my disregard for family. "Your brother was hurt," my mother informed me during a tense phone call. "After everything he's accomplished, the least you could do is show up for his important moments." What she couldn't know was that during his engagement party, I had been leading a critical neurosurgical operation that resulted in the rescue of kidnapped aid workers suffering from a unique neurological toxin. The mission earned me another commendation, one that would remain in a classified file rather than on my mantle. The growing divide between my professional success and personal failure created an increasingly unbearable tension. Each family interaction became more strained, each deception more painful. As Ben's residency commencement approached, I found myself at a breaking point, torn between my duty to global health security and my crumbling relationship with my family. The day of Ben's residency commencement dawned clear and bright. Perfect Southern California weather that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I deliberated for weeks about whether to attend, knowing my presence would be scrutinized by a family increasingly frustrated with what they perceived as my indifference to Ben's achievements. My decision to go wasn't simple. I requested a rare day off from my duties, arranged secure transport, and carefully selected civilian clothes that would allow me to blend in while still maintaining appropriate professional demeanor, a habit too ingrained to break. Even in this context, the University Medical Center gleamed in the morning sun as I approached. I instinctively catalogued security positions and protocols with my trained eyes, noticing details most civilians would miss. This awareness reminded me how far I was from the person my family believed me to be. I arrived deliberately late, slipping into the back row as families claimed seats near the front. My parents occupied prominent positions in the family section. My father wore his best suit with the pride of a chief surgeon whose son was following his distinguished path. My mother sat beside him, elegant in a navy blue dress, her posture reflecting the professional precision she'd absorbed through decades of marriage. The ceremony proceeded with the characteristic discipline and tradition of a prestigious medical institution. Each element, from the procession of faculty to the precise presentation of awards, followed protocols I knew intimately from my own classified ceremonies. The difference was that today's event was public, celebrated openly with proud families, unlike the clandestine recognition of my own achievements. As the ceremony progressed, I found myself analyzing the security perimeter out of professional habit, while simultaneously absorbing the significance of Ben's accomplishment. Completing a rigorous residency represented years of grueling training and exceptional dedication, a fact I appreciated perhaps more fully than anyone else in my family could. Midway through the ceremony, I noticed a familiar face on the platform, Dean Thompson, head of the medical faculty, who had championed my research and often collaborated with the Blackwell Institute. He was scheduled to deliver remarks as part of the leadership cadre. Seeing him triggered an immediate internal alert. Dean Thompson was one of the few high-ranking medical leaders who knew my complete professional record and true rank. I shifted slightly in my seat, angling myself to become less visible from the stage. The movement was subtle, the kind of adjustment medical professionals make instinctively to avoid recognition when necessary. For a moment, I believed I had successfully minimized my presence. Then came Ben's moment of recognition. He stood tall as his accomplishments were read, his face composed in the disciplined expression of a dedicated physician receiving honors. Despite our complicated relationship, pride swelled in my chest. Whatever else had transpired between us, my brother had earned this moment through genuine merit and determination. As applause followed Ben's recognition, I allowed myself to relax marginally. A mistake in retrospect. My slight movement caught Dean Thompson's eye during his scan of the audience. I watched his expression change as recognition dawned. First confusion, then certainty, then an unmistakable reaction to finding a highly decorated professor of neurosurgery sitting anonymously in civilian clothes at a residency commencement. Our eyes locked momentarily. In that brief exchange, I conveyed a silent request for discretion that medical professionals of our standing understand implicitly. The dean gave an almost imperceptible nod, and I believed the moment had passed without incident. The ceremony continued with the remaining recognitions and formal remarks. I began calculating my exit strategy, planning to congratulate Ben briefly before departing to avoid extended family interaction. But as the formal portion concluded and families began moving toward their graduating residents, I noticed Dean Thompson conversing with another esteemed physician while gesturing subtly in my direction. My internal alarm sharpened. The second doctor, Dr. Chun, had also worked with my team during a joint neurological intervention the previous year. Now both men were looking in my direction with that particular expression of medical leadership, preparing to acknowledge a fellow professional. I began moving toward the exit, hoping to evade the approaching confrontation. But the crowd's movement blocked my path. As families surged forward to congratulate their graduates, I found myself inadvertently pushed toward the area where Ben stood with my parents rather than toward the exit I'd been targeting. In that moment of navigational confusion, Dean Thompson reached me, his commanding presence parting the crowd around us. I straightened instinctively, muscle memory responding to the presence of a superior despite my civilian clothes. What happened next would permanently alter my family's perception and change the course of our relationships forever. Professor Miller. Dean Thompson's voice carried clearly above the post-ceremony chatter. The title echoed in the space around us, turning heads. My parents, standing just feet away beside Ben, froze in confusion. "I didn't expect to see you here today." "Dean Thompson," I responded automatically, assuming the formal posture ingrained through years of medical service. "It's good to see you, sir. Last time was that complex neuro-rehabilitation project, wasn't it?" he continued, either unaware of or unconcerned about my family's proximity. "Your insights into neuroplasticity were impeccable, as always. Saved a lot of function." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Ben's expression transformed from celebration to bewilderment. My father stood rigid, his brow furrowed in deepening confusion. "Professor," my father finally spoke, the word sounding foreign on his tongue when directed at me. "There must be some mistake." Dean Thompson turned, noticing my family for the first time. Recognition flashed across his face as he took in my father's esteemed professional demeanor. "Dr. Miller," he acknowledged with respect, before turning back to me with raised eyebrows. "They don't know." Before I could respond, Dr. Chun approached, extending her hand. "Professor Miller, your team's work on the transcranial magnetic stimulation protocols was remarkable. We've implemented your methods across 3 research divisions. Now, the reality of my position was materializing around us like a photograph developing in solution, becoming clearer with each passing second. My carefully maintained cover, the story of professional mediocrity I'd cultivated for years, was dissolving in real time. "Alex?" My mother's voice trembled with confusion. "What are they talking about?" Dean Thompson assessed the situation with the quick comprehension of a seasoned medical leader. "Dr. Miller. Mrs. Miller." He addressed my parents directly. "Your daughter is one of our most valuable assets in neurological research. Her work in advanced neurosurgery and experimental therapies has been extraordinary." "That's not possible," my father stated flatly. "Alex left medical school. She works at a pharmacy. She's a professor of neurosurgery at the Blackwell Institute," Dean Thompson corrected, "and at a rank that reflects exceptional service." The pharmacy work would have been her cover story, fairly standard in her division. Ben stepped forward, his new residency pin gleaming on his lapel. "Alex, is this true?" The moment of decision had arrived without warning or preparation. Years of secrecy pressed against the sudden exposure, creating a disorienting pressure. But as I looked at my family's confused faces, I recognized that continuing the deception was no longer an option. "Yes," I confirmed simply. "It's true." My father's expression cycled through disbelief, confusion, and the beginning glimmers of reassessment. "You're actually a professor of neurosurgery?" "At the Blackwell Institute, in the Advanced Neurocomputation Division," I specified, the words feeling strange after years of careful avoidance. "I was recruited from Harvard Med directly into a classified research program." The dropout story was my cover. Other medical leaders who recognized me had begun to drift over, creating an impromptu gathering that made the revelation increasingly public. A leading neuroscientist from the Mayo Clinic nodded respectfully in my direction. "Professor Miller's computational models changed our entire approach in the Alzheimer's intervention." My mother looked physically unsteady. "All this time, when we thought, I couldn't tell you," I said quietly. "Most of my work is classified at the highest levels." The cover story was a requirement, not a choice. Ben's expression had transformed completely, shifting from confusion to a growing understanding that only another medical professional could fully grasp. "That's why you missed my engagement party." "Coordinating a critical neurological intervention on a dignitary in Eastern Europe," I confirmed. "Couldn't wait, and I couldn't explain." My father, ever the dedicated surgeon, had regained his composure and was processing the information with clinical precision. "What's your research classification level?" "Higher than I can specify in this setting," I answered, the response itself confirming more than the words contained. Around us, the crowd continued to celebrate, largely oblivious to the family drama unfolding in our small circle. But within that circle, years of misperception were crumbling under the weight of revealed truth. Dean Thompson, sensing the personal nature of the moment, prepared to withdraw. Dr. Miller, you should be proud. Your daughter's professional record is exceptional. The details are classified, but the value is beyond question. He turned to me with a respectful nod. Professor, I'll see you at next month's Inter-Institute research briefing. As he departed, the protective barrier between my two worlds, the accomplished medical professional and the family disappointment, had been irrevocably breached. Standing before my family in civilian clothes, but now recognized as Professor Miller, I felt exposed in a way that countless high-stakes surgeries had never made me feel. Why would you let us believe you'd failed? My mother asked, hurt evident in her voice. It wasn't about what you believed, I explained carefully. It was about research security and patient privacy. The fewer people who knew, the safer the research and the people involved. My father, processing this revelation with decades of medical experience, was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had been hidden. To become a professor at your age, in neurosurgery. Ben, with his own medical training, was connecting dots fastest. Those unexplained absences, the vague explanations, that time you showed up at Christmas with what looked like surgical burn scars you claimed were from a kitchen accident. Not a kitchen accident, I confirmed quietly. As reality settled around us, I watched my family recalibrating years of perceptions and judgments. The disappointment they had carried, and the disappointment I had endured, was transforming into something else entirely. Something yet undefined, but irrevocably changed. We have a lot to talk about, my father said finally, his voice carrying the weight of a man discovering he had been profoundly wrong about a fundamental truth. Yes, I agreed. We do. The family dinner following Ben's ceremony took place at an upscale restaurant near the university. A celebration planned long before the day's revelations. What should have been exclusively focused on Ben's achievement had now become something else entirely, the first honest family gathering of my adult life. We sat at a private table, security conscious even now. My father ordered wine with uncharacteristic generosity, perhaps recognizing that this conversation required social lubrication. Silence hung heavily as menus were studied with unusual intensity, everyone avoiding the elephant in the room until the waiter departed with our orders. So, my father began, setting his water glass down with precision. A professor. It wasn't a question, but I nodded. Confirmation. That's remarkably fast advancement, he continued, the career surgeon in him automatically calculating the timeline, especially for someone in. He lowered his voice, neurosurgery. It was a unique path, I acknowledged. The program I was recruited into accelerates promotion timelines based on field performance and research breakthroughs rather than standard time and grade requirements. My mother, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. All those times we thought you were being flaky or irresponsible, disappearing from family events, being unreachable for days. I was deployed on a research mission or in a critical surgery, I finished for her, often in locations I can't name, doing things I still can't discuss. Ben leaned forward, professional curiosity mixing with brotherly reassessment. That scar on your forearm from 2 Christmases ago. A biopsy went wrong? High-K procedure, I said simply. My father's face tightened. The career surgeon understood immediately what went wrong typically meant in a high-risk procedure. And we were giving you grief about missing family photos, my mother whispered, horror dawning in her expression. The conversation paused as our salads arrived. When the waiter departed again, my father asked the question that clearly bothered him most. Why neurosurgery? You were so keen on cardiology. I had to smile slightly. Of course, that would be his first substantive question. The program that recruited me operated jointly, but my specific aptitude was for advanced neurological analysis and surgical innovation. The work suited my particular skills regardless of medical specialization. Which are, he pressed. Complex neural pathway mapping, pattern recognition in neurodegenerative diseases, development of experimental therapies, some other specialties I can't detail. Ben whistled softly. That's the heavy stuff, Alex. My mother was struggling to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with this new reality. But why couldn't you tell us anything? We're your family. Research classification and patient privacy, I explained gently. The nature of my work means that knowledge of my real position could potentially endanger ongoing studies or compromise sensitive patient data. For 12 years, my father challenged, the hurt beneath his question evident despite his professional demeanor. Not one word of truth. That's the job, Dad, I said simply. You, of all people, should understand that some positions require complete compartmentalization. He fell silent, medical discipline acknowledging what the father in him wanted to deny. The main course arrived, providing another brief reprieve from the intensity of the conversation. As we began eating, Ben broke the tension with a short laugh. So all those times I was bragging about my promotions and assignments, you were talking to someone who was briefing the WHO. I finished with a small smile. God, I must have sounded like such an idiot, he groaned. You didn't, I assured him. Your accomplishments are real and significant. Different medical areas, different challenges. My mother set down her fork. Her food barely touched. I keep thinking about all the things we said to you over the years. The disappointment we expressed, the judgments. You didn't know, I said. You couldn't have. But we should have trusted you, she insisted, tears gathering. We should have seen that there was more happening than what appeared on the surface. Instead, we just wrote you off. The raw truth of her statement hung in the air. They had written me off, creating a narrative of the disappointing daughter that fit the limited information they had. My father, always less comfortable with emotional displays. Redirected slightly. Your upcoming promotion. Dean Thompson mentioned a briefing next month. Are you being considered for department chair? I confirmed quietly. It's not finalized yet. His eyebrows rose sharply. At your age, that would be unusual. The recommendation is based on the TAVOS neuroreversal trial results, I acknowledged. That's all I can say about it. My mother wiped her eyes. And we wouldn't have known about this either if today hadn't happened. I hesitated, then admitted the truth. Probably not the details. No. You might have eventually learned I was a medical professional, but specifics about rank and position would have remained classified. The meal continued with questions I could answer, intermingled with ones I couldn't. The boundaries of classified information remained, even in this new openness, creating an imperfect but vastly improved communication. For the first time, my family was seeing the outline of my real life, even if many details remained in shadow. After dinner, my parents invited me back to their home, a gesture that felt significant after years of emotional distance. In their living room, my mother disappeared briefly before returning with a dusty box. I kept these, she said, setting it between us. Even though I didn't understand why you'd want them. Inside were mementos from my pre-med and early med school days, my stethoscope, academic awards, photographs, items that would have made no sense to preserve for someone who had supposedly failed out. Yet, she had kept them anyway. Some part of me never believed the story, she admitted quietly. It didn't fit the daughter I raised, but I couldn't imagine an alternative explanation. My father, after several drinks and hours of processing, had grown unusually reflective. I was hardest on you, he acknowledged. Professional directness applied now to a personal failing. When we thought you'd washed out, I took it personally. Made it about my legacy rather than your path. I understood why, I told him honestly, the concept resonating deeply with his professional core. At the expense of being known by your own family. Ben, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke again. But things can be different now, right? I mean, we know the basic truth, even if details stay classified. It was the question I'd been considering throughout the evening. Some things can change, I agreed cautiously. You know my actual profession now, my general position, but most of my work will remain classified. There will still be unexplained absences, questions I can't answer, but we'll understand what they mean. Now, my mother said. As the evening drew to a close, my father did something unprecedented in our relationship. He stood, straightened as if addressing a fellow surgeon, and extended his hand formally. Professor Miller, he said, using my title for the first time. I believe I owe you an apology and my respect. I took his hand, years of professional bearing preventing the emotion in my throat from showing on my face. Thank you, Dr. Miller. It was an imperfect beginning to a new chapter. One where the truth, even partially revealed, created possibility for healing what deception had damaged. As I left my parents' home that night, I carried both the continued weight of necessary secrets and the newfound lightness of being partially known by those who mattered most. 6 months after Ben's residency commencement, I found myself approaching my parents' home for another family gathering. This time, a 4th of July barbecue that had been a Miller family tradition for decades. The familiar nervousness that had accompanied these visits for years had transformed into something different, a cautious optimism about family relationships rebuilding on more honest ground. As I walked up the driveway, carrying a dish I'd actually prepared myself rather than the usual hastily purchased store contribution, I noticed several of my father's old medical colleagues gathered around the grill. In previous years, I had avoided these medical-heavy gatherings whenever possible, finding the deception particularly difficult among those who spoke my professional language. Today was different. My father spotted me and straightened slightly. Not quite the attention stance of professional protocol, but a new recognition that carried its own significance. Alex is here, he called, using my familiar name, but with a new tone. As I approached, he did something unprecedented. He turned to his friends and said, "Gentlemen, my daughter, Professor Miller, head of neuroscience at the Blackwell Institute." The introduction, simple but accurate, represented a seismic shift. The retired doctors nodded with the respect of professionals who understood precisely what the title and institute signified, particularly for someone my age. No details were necessary. The basic facts communicated volumes to those who spoke the language of medicine. My mother emerged from the house, her greeting warmer than I could remember in years. As she hugged me, she whispered, "I put together a small display. Nothing classified, I promise." Curious, I followed her inside to the study, my father's domain, traditionally filled with his medical memorabilia. In one corner, she had created a discreet but meaningful arrangement, my medical school graduation photo, the few unclassified research grants I'd been able to share, and a recent formal photograph in my lab coat following my promotion to department chair. "Is this okay?" she asked, uncertainty in her voice. "I wanted to honor your work, too, but I wasn't sure about security concerns." I examined the display carefully. "It's perfect," I assured her. "Nothing here reveals operational details." Her relief was evident. "Good. Your father checks it every day, you know." I think he's still wrapping his mind around everything. Returning to the backyard, I found Ben manning the grill alongside our father. My brother's transformation had been perhaps the most straightforward. One medical professional recognizing another, with a shared understanding that comes from parallel experiences despite different specializations. "Chairperson," he greeted me with a grin and a deliberately informal bow. "Burger or hot dog?" "Both," I replied, falling easily into the sibling banter that had been absent for too long. "I just finished 3 weeks on nutrient paste. I'm making up for lost time." He nodded, understanding immediately what 3 weeks likely signified without asking questions he knew I couldn't answer. This new shorthand between us, acknowledging the boundaries of classified work without resentment, had become one of the unexpected gifts of the truth. The afternoon progressed with a lightness I hadn't experienced at family gatherings in over a decade. Though many topics remained off-limits, my recent research locations, the nature of current projects, the specifics of upcoming assignments, the fundamental truth of who I was and what I did, now formed the foundation of our interactions. My father, always more comfortable with actions than words, found ways to express his changed perspective. He introduced me to his colleagues with unmistakable pride. He referenced my research insights when discussions turned to current medical affairs. And most tellingly, he deferred to my expertise in areas where neurosurgery intersected with cardiology concerns, a professional respect that meant more than any verbal apology. As evening approached and we gathered for the traditional Miller family photo, I stood beside Ben. Both of us now recognized for our service rather than compared by it. My mother arranged us with the precision of a longtime medical spouse. "My children," she said to a neighbor who was taking the photograph. Both serving humanity, just in different ways. The simple statement acknowledged the parallel value of our different paths, a recognition that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Later, as fireworks illuminated the sky, my father joined me at the edge of the yard where I'd stepped away briefly to check a secure message. "All good?" he asked, the question encompassing more than the immediate communication. "Yes," I confirmed, returning the phone to my pocket. "Nothing urgent?" He nodded, gazing upward at the patriotic display rather than at me, a medical man's approach to emotional conversation. "I've been thinking about what it cost you," he said finally. "Carrying that cover story all these years, bearing our disappointment when you were actually doing my job," I finished when he trailed off. "That's all it was, Dad. The job I was assigned, with the parameters required. But the personal cost," he insisted, still watching the fireworks, "missing the recognition you deserved, even from your family." I considered this, formulating my response with the same care I applied to medical assessments. "There's something freeing about being evaluated solely on your work, without external expectations or family legacy influencing perceptions," I offered. "In some ways, starting with a blank slate let me define my own path." He absorbed this perspective thoughtfully. "Still, I regret the judgments we made with incomplete information." "That's the nature of advanced research," I replied with a small smile. "Everyone operates with incomplete information. The difference is whether you recognize its incompleteness." This observation, applying professional principles to personal relationships, seemed to resonate with him. "A fair assessment," he acknowledged, clinical precision in his nod. As we rejoined the family gathering, I reflected on the strange journey of the past 6 months. The revelation at Ben's ceremony had not instantly repaired years of misunderstanding, but it had created space for something new to grow. The family that had once seen me as their greatest disappointment was now navigating a recalibrated relationship based on partial truth, the maximum disclosure my position allowed. 2 weeks later, I stood at attention during my promotion ceremony, the prestigious medallion of a department chair being affixed to my lapel. Unlike previous promotions, celebrated only among cleared colleagues, this one included 3 seats in the family section, occupied by my parents and brother. The technical details of my accomplishments remained classified in the official citation, cloaked in the deliberately vague language of advanced neurological research. But the pride in my family's eyes needed no detailed explanation. They understood enough now. Not everything, but enough. As the ceremony concluded and I joined my family, my mother embraced me with tears in her eyes. "I always knew you were exceptional," she whispered. "I just didn't know how." My father, ever the renowned surgeon, extended his hand for a formal shake before professional composure gave way to parental pride. He pulled me into a brief, tight hug. "Well done, Chair Miller," he said gruffly. "Well done." The journey from family disappointment to recognized professional had been complicated by necessary secrets and security requirements that would never fully disappear. But standing with my family, accepting congratulations for an achievement they could finally acknowledge, I found peace in being partially known. An imperfect but meaningful visibility after years in the shadows. For anyone who has been misjudged or underestimated, there's a powerful lesson in this experience. Sometimes the truth emerges in unexpected ways, and sometimes the perceptions others hold aren't reflections of reality, but simply products of limited information. The worth you create through your work and choices remains valid, even when unrecognized, and authenticity, even when necessarily incomplete, creates possibilities for connection that deception cannot. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones we carry quietly within us until the right moment for revelation arrives. What would you have done in my place, knowing the stakes? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts.